This Wednesday and Thursday, Winnipeg's GSwell will be featuring a true Canadian piano phenom, pianist Corey Hamm. For those unfamiliar with Corey Hamm, he is currently on faculty at the University of British Columbia School of Music, where he teaches piano and chamber music. He has commissioned more than 400 works of the piano and has performed and taught all over the world, championing works by composers such as Henri Dutilleux and Frédéric Rzewski. While in Winnipeg, he will be playing two concerts, one on Wednesday, March 6th at 12:30 at the University of Manitoba's Desautels Faculty of Music in their Eva Claire Hall. And the second concert will take place on Thursday, March 7th at 7:30 at the Muriel Richardson Auditorium at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. The concert is called The People United, or El Pueblo Unido. And aside from Corey Hamm, the concert will feature the fantastic Latin American group from Winnipeg, Papa Mambo. The two concerts will consist of two completely different programs of virtuosic music for the piano that are sure to keep audiences engaged and enthralled. And joining me here in the Classic 107 studio, I am joined by Gordon Fitzell, who is a composition professor at the Desautels Faculty of Music and curator for this concert, and pianist Corey Hamm. Hello to you both. It's nice to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, Chris. Good to see you again.
Yeah, It's a pleasure.
I first want to get right into it because there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of layers to this onion. Gord, can you first talk about how you met Corey and what made you bring him to Winnipeg? And I believe this is not the first time he's been here, right?
True. Yeah. You've been here a few times, at least the second. I think probably more than that. But I remember too.
I've been to, I think for us, our associated together, I think it's the second.
Yeah.
But I've been here before other times.
But the answer to your question goes way back to Edmonton, Alberta, where we were both students at the School of Music there. And at that time, well, for his whole professional life, Corey's been incredibly industrious. And at that point in his life, he was part of what was called the Hammerhead Consort, which was a quartet of two piano, two percussion, and they commissioned all sorts of composers and recorded and played around quite a bit in different concert halls, etc. So in a way, that was my first experience meeting Corey. So we were both students there in our 20s, I suppose. And so we go way back, but because we live in different cities, we see each other every once in a while, and known him a long time, but it's always a pleasure to hear him play. It's a fabulous experience, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
And Corey, how does it feel to be back in Winnipeg?
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's always great to see Gordon. And, of course, I've been keeping track of all Gordon's works as well over the decades, too, which are always really amazing, too. So it's going to be fun to have a beer and play some music and talk about some great composers.
The 12:30 concert tomorrow features new music by a variety of contemporary composers. This is the concert that's happening at the University of Manitoba's Desautels Faculty of Music. Setting aside the Carly Toporowski split piece, which we're going to talk about that in a bit. Corey, how did you choose the repertoire for this concert?
Well, I guess the repertoire. Originally, I was thinking, I should start by saying that a bunch of composers over the pandemic wrote me piano pieces. And so that was really a privilege. I'm really thankful for that. And there's a whole bunch more than we could fit in the concert, of course. So I chose, at least partially, from composers that wrote me pieces and, favorites of mine. But I also included one piece that was not written for me, the Rania Didia piece that I'm playing tomorrow in the noon hour concert, was not written for me, but it's a great piece that I've played a lot and I love it. And I just thought it fit nicely into the mix. And I do know Rania Didia. He has written me other pieces before the pandemic. But this piece, I just thought, Ether is the piece I'm playing. I just thought its trajectory as a piece would work well in this context.
If you could describe the overall sound of the program, is it serialistic? Is it minimalistic? Is it tonal? Maybe touch on some pieces to sort of describe that?
Sure. I think it's a whole bunch of things. But each composer is different in their style, of course, as you'd expect. But I would say that they're all tonal. The Yedidya is full of clusters and sort of these cloud-like clustery piano chords that are so cool, floating around, and then they come to a head as they do in this kind of storm, and it finishes with these tumultuous, gigantic chords that are like 40 notes. The chords, and you have to roll them because, of course, nobody has 40 fingers, and that's sort of the ending is the climax of this piece, but it began in clouds, called Ether. And then the John Sathis piece, Avenoir, sadly, one of my cousins, beloved cousins, passed away. And she was always a great, Dallas Chappell was her name. She lived in Victoria. And she was always a real supporter of me in my crazy modern music ways. She would come to my concerts and cheer me on when other people were like, "Why are you playing that?" You know, she was fantastic. And so we were all very sad when she passed away. But I thought it would be a great thing to commission a composer to write some piece in her memory. And I chose John Sathis, the great New Zealand composer, whose music I really love a lot. It was hyper rhythmic, and he has some Greek influences from his own
I was reading about
history, his own genealogy, and also some sort of poppy rhythms. I mean, he's not pop, but it's cool, anyways. And so I asked him, and he said sure. And he wrote this great piece, Avenoir, for me, very virtuosic and cathartic kind of piece, which is appropriate given its
subject matter.
Exactly. And it's very rhythmic. It also has some sort of pop energy, but it's not pop music. Beautiful, minimalistic kind of stuff, sort of, in a way, in his own way. And that's Ether, that's Avenoir. And then Dorothy Chang is one of my colleagues and friends at UBC. She's a wonderful composer. She wrote this piece for me a long time ago. So this was not written during the pandemic, but I brought it back. She wrote a set of 5 pieces called Five. And I chose 3 from there for this concert. And Ephemera is the first piece, and it's also kind of a atmospheric, cloud-like piece, and very, very beautiful. Then there's Echoes, the second piece from that set, and that is at the limits of audibility, really, and kind of canonic, imitative, but also very beautiful and sparse and amazing little piece. And then the third piece is Toccatina, which is a little toccata, very fast, rhythmic piece with this ostinato, this rhythmic and melodic figure that occurs pretty much from beginning to end, but is covered in barnacles of other stuff. All fantastic pieces. And so it was kind of fun to choose those because I love all those pieces.
Yeah, it sounds really fascinating. I want to talk about the Carly Toporowski Splet piece. Gord, how did this piece end up making it into the program for tomorrow's noon hour concert?
Yeah, I'm so pleased to talk about that. Something that Groundswell's been running for a long time is an emerging composers contest. And a number of years ago, after many years of it being a Manitoban offering, we've gone national with it. So it's the Groundswell's National Young Composers Competition. And it's been amazing. We've gotten dozens and dozens of applications over the last number of years. And we're very pleased to be assisted by some of Canada's most spectacular composers and players who've, over the years, helped us choose the winners. We put together a jury pool. I believe Nicole Lisée, an
fellow BU
alum, friend of yours and mine, helped us out with that task a good number of months ago. And one of the nice things about this contest is that unlike some where a composer might have to write a piece on spec and hope that it gets chosen such that because it has to fit the instrumentation for the planned concert. But in this case, what we did is we asked them to submit, really what you think is one of your best pieces. And then we go through the jury process, and Carly ended up being the winning composer. And the prize is essentially a commission to write for the esteemed Corey Hamm, who's been working on the piece. And I've had a look at the score too. It's a very evocative piece. And by the way, I was going to say, it was so interesting a moment ago to hear you describe all the pieces. Like, don't you find it, Chris, so interesting to hear the performer describing the piece? It's like this running commentary that's both technical and aesthetic. So that was great. Thanks for that, Corey. But that's where this piece comes from. And we were very excited to give it its premiere.
Yeah, and Corey, what's it like to play it?
Oh, it's fun. Of course, it's called Ghost Story, and it's in 3 sections. And the first section is tonal and simple in sound and harmony, I would say. Beautiful, of course, but simple. Mm-hmm. And then it progresses. You get more and more. Carly did some cool experimentation with non-traditional piano sounds. So rubbing your fingers and hands and palms along the wood and thwacking the wood of the piano and doing these little flick of the piano keys to get this interesting little percussive sound. And she was exploring also with a very light, undamaging chain to put on the bass strings of the piano to get a different kind of a cool sound out of the piano. So it's all in the name of creating a kind of mystical, ghostly sound and progression through the piece.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So that is the concert that's happening tomorrow at 12:30 at the University of Manitoba's Dieseltel Faculty of Music in the Eva Claire Hall. And then we've got this concert on Thursday at the Winnipeg Art Gallery at the Muriel Richardson Auditorium. We're going to be doing some protesting. It's going to feature some Latin American protest songs performed by Papa Mambo and the gargantuan and virtuosic set of variations by Frederick Rzewski on the protest song El Pueblo Unido Jamás Será Vencido, excuse my Spanish, or The People United Will Never Be Defeated. Gord, do you have a revolutionary streak? Are you going to show up to this concert in a red beret? Or how did protest songs become the central focus of this concert?
All right. Well, stay tuned as to my sartorial display. Well, a number of ways. I'll start locally. Rodrigo Muñoz and Papa Mambo, as you mentioned, are an institution in Winnipeg and have traveled across the country too. And in many ways, I would say certainly in Winnipeg and elsewhere have redefined what it is to be a Latin band. And they have all sorts of configurations, and this is the Papa Mambo Trio. Mm-hmm. And they will be performing a set, as you say, of, could call them protest songs, political folk songs from South America, and indeed from Chile. I believe they are all from Chile.
Yeah, Rodrigo was born in Chile.
Absolutely, yeah. And he's lived in Winnipeg since mid-childhood, I believe, but very much brings part of that culture with him. And so together with him, but really Rodrigo's the one who was the force behind putting this set together. And the vision was that set of Chilean folk songs, political protest songs, would conclude with Sergio Ortega's The People United, or specifically, as you say, El Pueblo Unido Jamás Será Vencido. Which has been recorded by all sorts of amazing artists. I think most famous by, if I can pronounce it correctly, Quilapayún. Mm-hmm. And so it's a world-famous recording and a world-famous song. And it's from that song that the late composer Frederick Rzewski composed what will be on the second half, which is Corey's performance of that piece, The People United Will Never Be Defeated. Mm-hmm. And that piece takes the themes and elements from the 3 or 4 minute folk song and expands it into a set of variations that is truly virtuosic, epic, monumental. Really, these are not hyperboles. You'll have to be there to see what I mean.
Before we get to the Rzewski, I find the history behind this song, "The People United Will Never Be Defeated," super interesting. Gord, can you talk? You've touched on it a little bit, but like, it's my understanding it was written just prior to the coup when Pinochet took over the Allende government in 1973. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. And I believe actually that the composer of that song, El Pueblo Unido, was a composer and a songwriter and all sorts of other things, a political motivator, agitator, force, etc., and indeed a friend of Allende, and wrote a number of songs for him, including, I was reading his election theme song. This would have been in the early 70s. And yes, this song was written, I think, rather quickly and in conjunction with that band that I mentioned, Kilo Payun, not long before, but during very much the unrest that preceded the Pinochet coup, sadly.
And my understanding is that the band actually had to get out of Chile to steer clear of Pinochet. Is that correct?
That's something I didn't know, but that's very interesting.
I was doing some reading about
many
that.
layers of history for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a protest song that's now used all over the world, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so we've talked about Rodrigo Munoz. He's from Chile. Corey, you have performed the Frederick Rzewski 36 variations on El Pueblo Unido Jamás Será Vencido around 80 times. Is it different every time? And from a sheer endurance standpoint, how do you manage it? Gatorade and pasta? Or,
Yeah, right. Well, that was definitely a factor at the beginning when I first learned the piece. I mean, I always dreamed of playing this piece since I first heard it on recording. Ursula Oppen's fantastic first recording of this piece back when I was 14, I think. I just happened to take it out of the library because I thought the album cover looked cool. But I didn't know Rzewski, I didn't know Ortega, I didn't know Ursula Oppens. I should have, but I didn't. I just thought the album cover was cool, and I listened to it, but I was immediately sold. I thought it was an incredible piece, and not only the super catchy, wonderful tune,
right,
but the amazing set of variations that Rzewski built, epic variations that he built on that. But because it's, about an hour long, it took a long time. I mean, as a kid, as a teenager, I sort of picked away at the easier variations, but there was no hope of me playing that whole piece. It was way harder than I could do at that time. But over the course of as I got better as a pianist and stuff, eventually it got closer and closer within reach. But even so, I didn't really learn the whole thing until I was a professor at UBC. After I think pretty soon after I got the job, there was a 70th birthday anniversary for Rzewski. And I thought, I'm going to make with one of my friends, Giorgio Magnananzi in Vancouver, fantastic composer and director of Vancouver New Music. Together we organized this Rzewski festival. And we invited Rzewski. He came and he played 3 concerts himself. And I had planned to have a series of performances of The People United in preparation for my performance of it for Rzewski when he was in Vancouver, because I would play that as part of the festival as well. Unfortunately, those other concerts, preparatory concerts, sort of fell through and got displaced to later. And so my very first performance of The People United was for Rzewski himself. That was my very first performance with him, which is not ideal. And I was terrified of that and scared because I had heard that Frederick Rzewski can be a bit thorny, which he indeed can. And then he arrived the night before I was to play that in Vancouver, and I was on stage, backstage, getting ready to play it, and he came backstage just fresh from the airport, just to say, I'm here, which was very gracious and kind and everything. But the last thing I wanted to see, last person I wanted to see before my first performance was the composer himself. I played the piece, and it was heartfelt and probably had lots of wrong notes. I'm sure it had lots of wrong notes, but it was very heartfelt, and he really appreciated it. He liked it. He wasn't thorny. He was genuine and great, and it was fantastic to play for him. And then since that time, I've played it many times. But it probably took me 20 performances before I could deal with the fact that it's an hour long and could wrap my brain around its complexity and
Just
everything.
Internalize it.
Internalize it, yeah.
More.
It took a long time, many performances.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all of the difficult parts of it, it's because, as you said, it's a very virtuosic piano piece, incredibly virtuosic.
Mammoth, yeah.
Mammoth. I still have to practice all those hard parts. Even though I've played it 80 times, I still have to practice them. They're not easy. But I feel like, having played it so many times, I think now I have a handle on the hour, the hour of the piece. That I'm confident with, and it's just the minutia, the notes that are still hard. But the totality of it, I feel pretty good about.
Yeah, I was listening to it today, and it is really, really something. And then I started reading about it. The number 6 plays a big role in the 36 variations. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, certainly. Well, it has this incredible structure. I mean, Bach's Goldberg variations has an amazing structure. It starts with an aria, has 30 variations, and then a return of the aria. Mm-hmm. And within those 30 variations, they're in groups of 3s, and they're structured like that. And at the halfway point after variation 15, this is Bach.
Yeah.
That's the end of the first half, and then starts variation 16 with the French overture. So like a new beginning for the second half. So all of that to say that the Rzewski has a similar kind of a structure. It's in 6 groups of 6 variations. And the first 5 variations, of course, it has the theme, a statement of the theme, and then 6 groups of 6. Within each group of 6, there's 5 variations that are different, as you would expect. Different character, not only different character, but different styles. Some of them are jazzy. Some of them are like 70s rock. Some of them are avant-garde like Stockhausen, and some of them are everything in between. And so that's the first 5 variation. Then the 6th variation of each set is a compilation of those previous 5. So they return. You hear them again in a truncated form to make the 6th. And that happens for each set of 6. At the end of the 18th variation, that's the end of the first half, half an hour in approximately. And then there's a little break. I mean, not an intermission, but you pause, and then you start the second half. The second half begins with some of the most virtuosic stuff. It's sort of the hyper virtuosic variations. But then they also have these formation of 6 variation in these sets. When you get to variation 31 is actually a compilation of the first variation of each set. So 1, 7, etc. Variation 32 is the second variation. So these return, and you remember, an hour ago I heard these before. Then you get to the coolest variation, which is variation 36, because it's a compilation of all of the previous variations, but in little snippets, because they pass by so.
Yeah.
And I often think of it as if you're just gradually switching through radio station, the dial. But all of the radio stations, whether they're country or pop or folk or classical or whatever, they're all playing the same tune, but in different styles, and you're just switching between all the radio stations. And that's very, very cool. And then after the 36th variation, there's a moment where the pianist is given an option to improvise a cadenza, which I will do. And then there's an even epicer version of the theme that comes back, like Bach's aria, but this time it's expanded and even more grand than it was the first time.
Yeah, it's such an interesting structure of a piece. And as I was saying earlier, I was listening to the piece today, and there's some very tonal moments, there's some serialist moments, there's some big beefy moments. I was listening to it, and I was doing something else. Is there a variation where you're playing and whistling at the same time?
Yes. There are some extra, I have to yell at one point, and there's whistling, and that whistling comes back because, as I said, some of these variations, or all of the variations, will return. And there's a slam of the piano lid, which I think I won't be doing, so I don't get kicked out. Not that it damages the piano, but you never know. And then pianistically everything. There isn't anything inside the piano like happens in Carly's piece, for instance. But there is everything else happening on the keyboard and some whistling and a little bit of yelling and stuff.
And you worked with Jevsky on the piece. Is there one specific piece of advice that you remember him giving you about the variations?
I think one thing that he liked about my performance and stressed to continue to do that was the through composition of it. It became clear that he didn't really like it if people dwelt too much on each individual variation. He really liked it when the whole thing went from beginning to end. And then that amazing structure that we just spoke about becomes clearer if you just pass through. But if every variation has a different tempo, and I mean some of them do, but not all of them. There's a lot of common tempos between them. And if that doesn't happen, he thinks the piece sort of drooped. And so I'm very conscious. In fact, when I came to record that piece, because it was a very daunting thing for me to think about recording it, given the incredible performances that existed in recordings by Jevsky himself and Ursula Oppens and Marc-André Hamelin and Stephen Drury, all of these recordings that I revere. And so I was like, well, who am I? Why would I record this? But eventually I felt like, well, maybe I do have something to offer. And I would say that might be what it is the totality of the whole thing. That's what I strove for, and Jevsky and I talked about that.
Yeah, it's a great set of variations for our listeners out there. It's something you totally have to see. Gord, as curator, what do you hope audiences are going to take away from Thursday night's Groundswell performance?
Well, picking up on the last point, that might be it, actually, because it's so interesting to hear you so eloquently describe the structure behind it. And it is a monumental structural achievement of composition. But that's so interesting to hear that story about Jevsky, because that's what I was thinking as I was hearing you describe it too, is the way that an outstanding performer can somehow balance upon that structure and transcend it so that it's almost invisible to the audience. And that's what I'm hoping for, actually, because almost despite this puzzle box like structure of hierarchy and connection and Bach-like construction, there is such an expressive and emotional contour and flow and pacing to the piece. And in fact, when you were describing, what it is to perform it after a dozen times, after 20 times, and what did you say, after 20, then you feel like you're starting to get it. I'm sure we've all heard actors who've been fortunate enough to be in a run that, for weeks and months. And then you say, okay, now I really understand how to bring out the third act and this sort of thing. So I can only imagine what that would be like. But having heard Corey perform this live and in recording a number of times, that's really the thing that speaks to me, is this emotional content. And I was reading something not long ago that's related, that maybe part of what Jevsky was thinking in writing such a monumental piece is that the experience of hearing it, the emotion sinks even deeper and relates even more directly to the struggles of people who are fighting for freedom.
Yeah.
May I add something that I forgot to say? Just that, of course, everything that Gordon says is true. But I forgot to say that, of course, each of the individual variations, the first 5 of each set, represent us, people, right? Everyone's different, and you're going to have your Stockhausen avant-garde, and you're going to have your rock and roller, and you're going to have everything in between. And then at each set, they're brought together, the people united, right, with the 6th variation. And then everybody together in the 36th variation eventually at the end, after an hour. Also, the 5 variations represent the 5 fingers of the hand, and brought together, it's the fist, right?
Oh, wow.
Which is a true revolutionary image.
Yeah, right.
The visual image of a fist. Yes.
Right. The 5 fingers brought together. It's a fist, and it's a revolutionary song after all. So that's
absolutely.
important. And a funny story, if I may. One time I played this in a context of a new music concert where a bunch of young pianists were playing this, including me, and I couldn't play the whole thing. Of course, I would hog the whole show. So I had to play a little excerpt because that was sort of what I had brought to this festival. Mm-hmm. And so I chose the theme and then the third set of 6 variations, the third set, then the reprise of the theme. And afterwards, a gentleman who knew, somebody in the audience who knew the piece, came back to me and joking said, "Hey, you played the third set. You just gave all of us the finger." Right? Because it's the third finger, right? And he was kind of right, but that wasn't my intention. I swear it wasn't my intention. But I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about it when I was listening to it is the variations end. There's this piano sort of snippet of the theme, but it ends overall heroically, right? With this big fortissimo, right?
Yeah, certainly. I would say it's a triumph.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Corey and Gord, this has just been so great to talk to you today. I'm sure the concerts on Thursday and tomorrow are going to be amazing. Corey, all the best on stage while you're here. And to the both of you, thanks for taking the time to stop by and chat with me today about
Always such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.